greetings all. Hope this finds you well as always. It's now time for the latest update from the machine shop, where we're up to and what we're on with. First up, we'll have a look at Barry's little project, which is now actually working, running, revolving, doing exactly what it should do, looking magnificent in the process, and we're ever so slightly pleased with it. So, enjoy. There we go, lads. The proof of the pudding, as always, is in the eating. And as you can see, Barry's set up, and here he is, the main man himself, is doing the job. It's working a treat, mate. That's a smashing bit of work, that. I'm very, very pleased with how our main man here has made that work out. So big thumbs up to you, Barry. That's definitely working. Right, here's another job that's come in, complete with accompanying charming note, I must say, off Mr. Henwood. Very much appreciated, Mr. H. Good to see that. Anyway, what we have here is we have 2 sets of piston packings out of the S15. What's happened with these is these are the circular 3-part packings and they need regapping. Now, what I mean by regapping is, first of all, you've got to look at how they actually work. These 3 segments here assemble into a circular packing like this, and they sit around the piston rod. The piston rod goes through where that socket is sitting. They're held onto the piston rod by a garter spring that goes around the outside of them, and when they're first machined, they're machined with a gap in them like that. I'm maybe exaggerating slightly, but they'll be machined with a gap in them. Now, the idea is that that gap allows the packings, as they wear, to close up. Eventually, the gap will close up completely, and at that point they need, as Mr. Henwood has requested, regapping. Now, to regap these is slightly more challenging than regapping the traditional 2-part ones, because what we've got to do is we've got to mill some material off this face here, we've also got to mill some material off this face here, and this in turn will allow a gap to re-establish here and here, and so the piston packings will go again. So that's the job, so let's be about it. Right, so here we are, setting up to cut the first segment. I've already machined one end of it, as you can see. I'm now just setting up to machine the other end. To ensure I take the same amount off equally, what I do is take a parallel, sit it on the back jaw of the vise, and then level, and I'll be honest, I'm doing this purely by touch. It's surprising how sensitive the NZ fingers actually are when it comes to detecting irregularities like this. I then level the end of the packing with that parallel sat on the vise. And so now, when I take a cut with that, it should take about 50 thou off, and that should give us enough clearance to reassemble the packing. So we'll do this one, and then I've got another 3 segments to do, and then that's 1 set of packings done. Then there's the other set to do. So, okay, let's carry on. Right, so there we are. There's the first pair with their ends machined, and as we can see, we've got the distances about right, because the gap there and the gap there is about even. It hasn't been deburred yet. That's one of the reasons why it's not sitting down evenly. And there's another teeny tiny little problem yet to be dealt with. I don't know if anyone can notice it here, but have a think about what it might be, and then in the next video we'll deal with that. Okay, right, so here we go. I've got 3 segments now reassembled into a packing as they will be. I've closed the gaps up just so I can check they're all equal and the same. But, you know, remember I mentioned there's a problem to deal with still. I've deburred all of these. It's got all the rag, but there's still an issue. The issue can be seen quite clearly here if you look at it. You see how there's that step in the outer edge here? Right, well that step is being caused here. This inner segment here, because we've gapped it and reduced the diameter, you can see how a gap has now opened up between this segment and this part, and it's in contact here. So what we now need to do is file some off the end of these inner segments here. So we just modified this radius so we can close this gap up. Once that's done, they're done and ready to go. So let's get that on with that. And then there, as you go, spotlight filing, that gap's gone away. Now, a quick note on the filing. You'll notice that's the file I'm using, and it's got an orange insulating tape right around the handle. There is a very good reason for that. That, in my filing system, indicates to me what I call a brass file. That is, a file that's to be used solely on brass and bronze. The thing is, brass is quite a soft material. It's quite challenging to file. You need a very sharp file to cut it. As soon as a file's used on steel, it will lose that very sharp edge. And so what I have is I have files for brass and files for steel. And so that's just to indicate the difference. A file will be used on brass until it becomes too blunt to cut the brass, and then at that point it'll be sharp enough to cut the steel. So anyway, that's that done. So we've now just got to repeat that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, we've got each of these has 3 of these in, so we've got 1 there and 1 there. That's one set of segments done, and then we've got to rinse and repeat for the other set, and then that's them all done and ready to go back on the engine. Okay, and there we go, done, finished, and all ready to be refitted. So they've all been gapped, as we've seen, all the edges milled, all those chunks here, these small segments filed in. They've been trial fit together, they all fit perfectly snug. So the next job is for Chris to try and back onto the piston rod and just check the gaps are okay, and then that's job done. Right, this is the next job that's come in, and what we have here is a steam chest drain cock off one of the black 5s. It's actually off 44806, and we also have it rather tired mounting here. Now the problem is that you may notice, first of all, there's a bit of that mounting missing. There should be a chunk here. It's also cracked. This happened while it was on the engine, and so it needs replacing. It's since actually been swapped with one that was borrowed off Vera to keep 44806 going, but this job is now, to be honest, it's one of the long-standing jobs that I've sort of dug around to and thought, actually, we really should get that done. So the idea is we're going to get this finished. So it suffered a wee bit more damage, because not only being broken there, the drain cock body screws into it on that thread there. Now, I had to get it off, and I didn't really fancy my chances of unscrewing it, because the danger was it probably either going to shear the casting here with the amount of force I have to put into it, or it will gall and badly damage the thread. So my solution was rather simple but slightly brutal, which was simply to split it there with a cold chisel. So it split into 2 pieces and then came off the thread, leaving the thread completely unmarred. There's a tiny little ding in it at one point, but apart from that, there's no other damage to it. Now, what we're going to replace this with? Well, originally it was cast iron, and my idea is to replace it with a welded fabrication. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a piece of flat plate, which will form the back. We're then going to get a round stub slug of mild steel, which will be welded to it, and that will then be drilled and bored to give us the boss that it'll all screw into. We can put the thread in there as well, and then we can drill it for the mounting holes and whatnot. And this doesn't actually take steam pressure. This is purely a mounting. That hole in the bottom of the cock body there is blind. There's no steam goes down here at all. So the sole purpose of this is just hold this onto the bottom of the cylinder block. So that's the idea. And so our first job will be to get some pieces of plate, profile them, and get the boss made. So that's what we'll do. Right, so there we are. There's the plate profiled. So that's now all ready for Jules to make with the welding rods and glue it all together. Right, and just like that, Mr. Hayton's done his stuff. The weld's dried, so we can now get on with machining it. So there we go, that's the next stage. And finally, just to prove it's not a completely one-trick pony, just he undoes gear cutting, Barry's also been carrying on further with the rebushing of small motion for 44806. So we've got 2 new bushes there that are, I understand they're ready to be pressed. So you've got the outside and the inside diameter turned to size. You've also got the external grease groove, and the lubrication holes have been added. And so they will then in turn be pressed into the, I understand they're going into the tops of those 2 combination levers. And then I think once those suitable thrust strings added, that's most of the small motion for 44806 done. So that's another job that's coming together very nicely. So folks, there you are, and that's what we've got. I hope you found it educational, informative as always. Now take care, and I'll see you around.